the story I'm about to tell you. When I think about it, it's a story that's been talked about in hushed tones around town ever since it happened. This is the story of Jason Chambers, a 19-year-old young man from Lakeside, Oregon, whose life took a tragic turn on the evening of December 6, 2014. Jason was known by everyone in Lakeside. Back in high school, he'd been a star on the football field, and he later worked hard at a local hardware store. People always said he had a bright personality, even though he had his share of struggles growing up. He wasn't perfect. He'd had a few run-ins with a rough crowd, but he was well-liked by those who knew him. His story is one that still haunts the community. On that December day, Jason started out like any other. In the morning, he hung out with a couple of friends and then headed over to his mom's house for a quick nap. Later in the afternoon, he got a text and decided to leave his mom's place. He planned to grab a bite to eat and check on his car. Around 5:30 p.m., he was spotted at a gas station about 1.5 miles from where, sadly, his body would eventually be found. After the gas station, his cell phone data shows that Jason made a short trip to nearby Ridgefield before coming back to Lakeside. By about 7:30 p.m., he was back on the road. It all seemed pretty ordinary, until it wasn't. Later that evening, first responders rushed to Sherman Road in Lakeside, and what they found was something out of a nightmare. There, in the middle of a burning car, they found Jason. His car was engulfed in flames, and shockingly, he was caught in the fire too. He had burns covering about 98% of his body, and eyewitnesses later recalled that, even as he struggled, he was trying to move away from the flames. I've heard accounts saying that as firefighters approached, he cried out for help, and even tried to name someone, saying something like Aaron. Unfortunately, his injuries were so severe that his words were barely clear, and people still debate what he was trying to say. Jason was rushed to a Portland hospital, but despite the best efforts of the medical team, he passed away early the next morning. It was one of those moments that just shakes you to the core. After Jason's death, investigators got to work trying to piece together what had happened. They dug into his cell phone records, talked to witnesses, and combed through physical evidence. And so far, they could gather his cell phone data showing a clear timeline. He spent the day with friends, visited his mom, made that quick trip to Ridgefield, and was back on the road by 7:30 p.m. And also, his car keys were later found in a ditch along the roadside near the scene. This detail suggested that there might have been a struggle, or that he'd had to abandon his car in a hurry. And also, some eyewitness people on the scene described Jason's desperate state as he emerged from the burning car. His faint, strained words, possibly naming someone, added a mysterious twist to the case. Investigators considered a few different scenarios. They wondered if Jason had been targeted by an unknown assailant, or if things were more personal. And soon enough, suspicion began to focus on one person. Attention quickly shifted to Quinn Verdell Tellis, a local woman known for having a troubled past and a history of run-ins with the law. Let me break down what linked her to Jason's case. On the night of the murder, Quinn's story about where she'd been kept changing. At first, she said she'd only been with Jason in the morning. Later, she mentioned that a friend had picked her up, or that they'd visited a few local spots. But as investigators compared her words to cell phone data and surveillance footage, her alibis started falling apart. Not long after Jason's murder, Quinn deleted all texts and communications with him from her phone. That kind of digital cleanup raised a lot of red flags. The investigation also uncovered text messages where Quinn repeatedly asked Jason for sexual favors, requests that he always turned down. These exchanges painted a picture of a tense, uncomfortable relationship. The cell phone location data placed Quinn and Jason together until about 7:30 p.m., and DNA evidence found on items like Jason's car keys further connected her to the scene. With all this mounting evidence, authorities indicted Quinn on capital murder charges back in February 2016. Now, the legal battles in this case have been nothing short of convoluted. Quinn Verdell Tellis' trial was a roller coaster. The first trial held a few years after Jason's murder. The first trial began. The prosecution had a lot of evidence, digital records, surveillance footage, and forensic data, but the trial ended in a mistrial. Jurors got confused over the instructions regarding a unanimous verdict, and they couldn't come to a decision. Later on, they tried again in a retrial, but once more, the jury couldn't reach a unanimous decision, and another mistrial was declared. Throughout all this, Quinn kept saying she was innocent, while her defense pointed out that the only verbal clue, Jason's unclear attempt to say Aaron, was too unreliable given his condition. To complicate things further, Quinn was also implicated in another murder case, the killing of Ming Chen Xiao in Louisiana in 2015. This connection has tangled her legal fate across state lines. Even now, with multiple trials behind us and ongoing debates among prosecutors, justice for Jason Chambers still feels so far out of reach. The impact of Jason's tragic death has been profound. His family and everyone in Lakeside have been left with a deep sense of loss and more questions than answers. His parents, his friends, and the community have all held on to the hope that someday the truth will finally come to light. Even though some investigative leads have gone cold over the years, advances in forensic technology and renewed attention from local and federal agencies mean that, in some ways, the case is still alive. Jason Chambers' death has become the subject of documentaries, podcasts, and numerous news reports. Every retelling of his story reopens old wounds and fuels the ongoing quest for justice. So that's the story of Jason Chambers, a young man with a bright future whose life was cut tragically short. Thanks for listening. What I'm about to tell is not something that happened to me, but it's something that felt like it happened to me. It all started between 2002 and 2004. A man named Ariel Castro carried out an unspeakable crime. Over that, he abducted 3 young women, Michelle Knight, Amanda Berry, and Gina DeChesis, and kept them locked away in his home on Seymour Avenue in Cleveland for nearly a decade. Just imagine being trapped for years with no hope of escape. It's hard to even imagine. The first victim was Michelle Knight. It all started on August 23, 2002, when 21-year-old Michelle Knight was out about her daily business. She accepted a ride from Ariel Castro, who was known to her as the father of a friend. Castro had this way of seeming friendly and helpful. He told her he needed a hand with something innocent, like taking care of a puppy, and that small lie was all it took. Once Michelle was inside his home, everything changed. She was quickly restrained, and before she knew it, she was trapped in a nightmare. Michelle's abduction set the tone for what was to come, a life of isolation, abuse, and endless terror. The second victim was Amanda Berry. Less than a year later, on April 21, 2003, Amanda Berry's life was turned upside down. Amanda was just about to turn 17, walking home from her job at a fast food restaurant, a job that, for a lot of teens, is just part of growing up. That day, Ariel Castro approached her with an offer that seemed harmless at first. He claimed his son worked at the same restaurant and invited her over so she could meet him. Instead, he took her captive. Amanda's kidnapping was a devastating blow, and later on, she would endure even more as she gave birth to a daughter named Jocelyn while still in captivity. Despite the horror of her situation, Amanda's courage shone through as she cared for her child in the midst of unspeakable abuse. The last victim was Gina DeChesis. Then, on April 2, 2004, 14-year-old Gina DeChesis was abducted. Gina was walking home from school when, like the others, she encountered Ariel Castro, a man who was known to her family as a friend. He offered her a ride and mentioned he needed help finding his daughter. It was a ruse, a deceptive invitation that lured her into a trap. Before she could even process what was happening, Gina was taken into Castro's home and forced to endure the same horrific fate as Michelle and Amanda. Once inside that house on Seymour Avenue, the women experienced things that are almost too horrible to put into words. They were confined in small, dark rooms where they were chained and isolated from the outside world. The conditions were brutal. They were given very little food, forced to use buckets as toilets, and were allowed only the barest chance to shower. Imagine living in a place where even the basic comforts of life, food, water, and cleanliness are a distant memory. The abuse wasn't just physical, it was deeply emotional and sexual, a calculated campaign to break their spirits. Michelle Knight, for example, suffered multiple forced miscarriages because of the constant assaults. Amanda Berry, meanwhile, was forced to endure the unimaginable pain of having a child conceived through rape. Yet despite everything, she did what she could to care for little Jocelyn, teaching her to read and write in a place that offered nothing but despair. After nearly 10 years of living in that terror, something finally shifted on May 6, 2013. Amanda Berry, whose resilience had kept her going through the darkest days, noticed a small but crucial mistake. Castro had left one of the interior doors unlocked. That tiny lapse in his routine was the spark of hope they desperately needed. In a moment that must have taken every ounce of courage, Amanda screamed for help. And that cry, piercing through the silence of captivity, reached the ears of the neighbors. That's when two brave men, Charles Ramsey and Angel Cordero, were nearby and responded without hesitation. They rushed over and helped Amanda and her daughter escape through a broken door. Once Amanda managed to call 911, it set off a chain reaction that led the police to rescue Michelle and Gina later that same day. The relief, mixed with shock and disbelief, must have been overwhelming. A moment when a decade-long nightmare finally came to an end. Ariel Castro was later arrested and charged with a long list of horrific crimes, including kidnapping and rape. In a plea deal that shocked the community, he was sentenced to life imprisonment plus an additional 1,000 years without the possibility of parole. But just 1 month into serving his sentence, Castro was found dead in his prison cell. His death was ruled a suicide, a grim end to a man whose actions had caused so much pain. The house itself, where these unspeakable acts took place, was demolished on August 7, 2013, as part of the plea agreement. Demolishing that building was a symbolic step, a way for the community to try to erase the physical reminder of the horror that had occurred there. Today, the survivors, Michelle, Amanda, and Gina, are on a long journey to rebuild their lives. They have shared their stories through interviews, public appearances, and even books, turning their personal tragedies into a beacon of hope for other victims of abuse and kidnapping. Their courage and resilience continue to inspire countless people around the world. They stand as a testament to the strength of the human spirit, showing that even after enduring unimaginable horrors, it's possible to fight back, recover, and advocate for others. For me, sharing this story is about honoring the survivors and reminding everyone of the importance of vigilance and compassion. It's a call to action, a plea that we never become complacent and always look out for one another. No one should ever have to live in fear, and no one should have to endure what these brave women went through. Thanks for listening. It all started on the night of June 7, 2021. Alex Murdaugh, a name that many of you might have heard on the news, is on his family's massive hunting estate in Islandton, South Carolina. That evening, instead of enjoying a quiet night or planning for a future that suddenly seemed so promising, Alex made a discovery that would shock not just his family, but the whole country. He found the bodies of his wife, Maggie, who was 52, and his son, Paul, who was just 22, lying near the dog kennels on the estate. Both had been shot multiple times in what can only be described as a brutal, gruesome scene. Now, Alex immediately called emergency services at 10:06 p.m., reporting the horror he had uncovered. At the time, he claimed that he had been visiting his ailing father and wasn't at the estate when the murders happened. But as the investigation went on, things didn't add up. Cell phone data later revealed that Alex was actually near the kennels just before the killings. And a video recorded on Paul's phone even captured audio suggesting Alex's presence at that critical moment. Imagine that shock. The very man reporting the tragedy seemed to have been right there when it all went down. But as the investigation went on, things didn't add up. Cell phone data later revealed that Alex was actually near the kennels just before the killings. And a video recorded on Paul's phone even captured audio suggesting Alex's presence at that critical moment. Imagine that shock. The very man reporting the tragedy seemed to have been right there when it all went down. But as the investigation went on, things didn't add up. Cell phone data, but the investigation quickly turned that story on its head. Authorities discovered that the shooting wasn't random at all. It turned out that Alex had orchestrated the whole thing himself. He conspired with a man named Curtis Edward Smith, who was not only a distant cousin but also worked as a handyman for the family, to shoot him. The twisted motive behind this was that Alex wanted to stage his own death. His plan? To have his surviving son, Buster, collect a $10 million life insurance policy. It sounds like something straight out of a dark crime novel, and believe me, it's hard to wrap your head around. Curtis was arrested shortly after and faced a barrage of charges, including assisted suicide and insurance fraud. As if the violence wasn't enough, things took another turn when investigators started digging into Alex's personal and professional life. It was soon revealed that he had been embezzling millions of dollars from his law firm, Peters Murdaugh Parker Eltsroth and Detrick. Now that's a mouthful of a name for a firm, but it underscored just how big this operation was. His partners eventually confronted him, and in September 2021, Alex resigned from the firm. Not long after, he was disbarred and soon faced a slew of charges related to his financial misconduct. It was like watching a slow-motion train wreck where every layer of deceit just kept piling on more tragedy. Fast forward to July 2022, and the legal wheels were in full motion. Alex Murdaugh was formally charged with the murders of his wife and son. The trial that followed was nothing short of a media circus, with every detail scrutinized and debated in public forums. Prosecutors presented a mountain of evidence, cell phone data, financial records, and a motive that pointed clearly in one direction. They argued that Alex had committed the murders to cover up his massive financial fraud, which was on the brink of being exposed. By March 2023, after a trial that gripped the nation and kept everyone on edge, the verdict was delivered. Alex was found guilty and sentenced to 2 consecutive life terms without the possibility of parole. For many, it felt like a long overdue moment of justice for a case that had shocked so many people. But as we all know, sometimes when you think a story has wrapped up, new details come to light that throw everything into question. In October 2024, Alexander Blair, the new owner of the old Murdaugh family estate, claimed he'd found evidence that might suggest Alex wasn't entirely to blame. Blair specifically questioned the trajectories of the bullet holes at the crime scene, hinting that there could be more to this mystery than we initially thought. And then, in August 2024, the case took another dramatic turn. The South Carolina Supreme Court agreed to hear Alex Murdaugh's appeal for a retrial. His defense team brought up allegations of jury tampering, claiming that a court clerk named Rebecca Hill had influenced the jurors. The accusations didn't stop there. Hill even went on to publish a book about the case, which only fueled further controversy. The idea that the judicial process might have been compromised left everyone wondering if the truth had truly been uncovered. Thanks for sticking with me through this deep dive into a story that still feels like it's unfolding.